Hey, welcome to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. Think Thursday is all about your beautiful, brilliant human brain. We're talking neuroscience. We're talking behavior change. We are talking about your mindset. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. Hey there, it's Molly, and welcome to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist. Think Thursdays, you know, they are all about your beautiful, brilliant human brain. We talk about neuroscience and mindset, behavior change, and the way understanding our brains can help us live with more intention, more peace, and more agency. Today, we are talking about reminiscing. And if that topic sounds vaguely familiar, I did do an earlier Think Thursday episode back in April 2025. And if you haven't listened to that one, it was about reminiscing. I definitely recommend going back and checking it out. I'll link it in the show notes. And in that episode, we talked more broadly about why reminiscing feels good, how music and smell and photographs can trigger emotions and trigger memories, and why reminiscing can be such a powerful psychological tool. Today, I want to go a little deeper. And honestly, the reason this came up for me is that I just came back from a family reunion. And if you have ever been to a family reunion, you know that reminiscing is practically its own scheduled event, even if no one puts it on the agenda. People start telling stories. Someone brings up something that happened 30 years ago. Someone else remembers it completely differently. Somebody corrects the timeline and somebody adds a detail that nobody else remembered. And before you know it, you're not just sitting with your family in the present moment. You're also sitting with all these earlier versions of the people. You know, the little kid versions of my nieces and nephews, the young parent versions of them, the newlywed versions, the awkward teenage versions, and the versions of our parents, maybe who are no longer there, who used to say one thing all the time. And maybe you even notice a version of yourself that you have not thought about in a very long time. That was what struck me. When families reminisce together, we are not only remembering events, we are remembering identity. We are remembering who we were, who other people were, what mattered, where we came from. And sometimes, if we are paying attention, we are also remembering parts of ourselves we may have forgotten were still there. And that's where I want to go today, because reminiscing is not just a sweet little mental walk down memory lane. It is not just nostalgia, and it is not just remember when, followed by laughter around a table. Reminiscing can be a form of identity retrieval. It can be a way your brain reminds you this is a part of who you were, who you are. This is a part of what you have lived. This is a part of what you have survived, loved, learned, carried, and become. And when we are talking about behavior change, this matters. One of the things that makes change difficult is that we become very identified with our current state. We start to think, this is just who I am. I am not disciplined. I am not organized. I am not confident. I'm not good at starting over. Maybe it even sounds more like this. I used to be creative. I used to be fun. The brain, because it always has a way of trying to make sense of things, right, can take a current emotional state and turn it into a global identity statement. But reminiscing can interrupt that. It can remind us that the current version of ourselves is not the only evidence available. We may have been things across the course of our lives, and we've been many things across the course of our lives. We have been brave in seasons when we did not feel ready. We've learned hard things when they mattered enough to us. And we've started over, surprised ourselves, grown through moments we did not know how to handle at the time. And this is why I think reminiscing deserves more credit than we often give it. Memory is not just about what happened. Memory is part of how we know who we are. From a neuroscience perspective, autobiographical memory is the term often used for memory connected to your personal life story. These are not just facts you know. These are memories connected to your lived experience. The name of your elementary school is a fact. But the feeling of walking through those doors, the sound of the hallway, the smell of the pencil shavings, the friends you sat beside at lunch, the teacher that you loved, that is autobiographical memory. It has context, it has emotion, it has self-reference. And when we access those memories, we are not just retrieving data. Our brains are reconstructing an experience. This is one of the reasons that reminiscing can feel so vivid. The hippocampus is involved in helping us organize memory and context, and the medial prefrontal cortex is involved in self-reflection and personal meaning. The default mode network, which we have talked about before here on Think Thursday, becomes active when we turn inward and think about ourselves, about our past, about our future, and the stories that we use to make sense of our lives. So when you are sitting at a family reunion and someone says, "Remember that summer when?" your brain may start pulling together scenes, people, sensations, emotions, and meaning. And meaning is the key. The human brain is not only a remembering machine, it is a meaning-making machine. We are constantly asking, consciously or unconsciously, what does this say about me? What does this say about my life? What does this say about where I belong, what I value, what still matters? Healthy reminiscing can help us answer those questions in a way that brings connection, coherence, and perspective. I love that word coherence here because so much of life can feel fragmented while we are living it. We move through seasons, we change roles, we become parents, caregivers, professionals, partners, friends, and sometimes people we did not expect to become at all. We lose people, we gain people, we move, we grow, we grieve, and we keep going. And then at certain points, we look back and we try to make sense of the whole thing. And this is a part of why reminiscing often becomes more common as we get older. It does not necessarily mean we are stuck in the past. It can mean our brains and our psyches are doing that important work of integration. And as we get older, there's just a lot more to integrate, right? Psychologist Eric Erikson described a later stage of development as integrity versus despair. In simple terms, it is the process of looking back over life and asking, can I make peace with my story? Can I see meaning here? Can I integrate the joys and the losses, the choices and the regrets, the moments of pride and the moments of pain? I think that is such a compassionate way to look at reminiscing because sometimes we make fun of ourselves for it. We say, oh, here we go again, telling the same old stories. And yes, sometimes families do tell the same stories over and over. Sometimes you can practically see the story coming before the person even starts. You know the setup, you know the punchline, you know who is going to object and say, that's not how it happened. But even those repeated stories may be doing something important. They are keeping shared identity alive. They are saying, this is who we are. This is what our family remembers. This is what we laugh about. This is what we survived. And this is how we belong to each other. Of course, every family story is not warm and fuzzy. I do not want to over-romanticize this. Families are complicated. Memory is complicated. And the past is complicated. Which brings me to an important distinction. There is a difference between reminiscing and rumination. Rumination is when we go back into the past and get stuck there. It is repetitive and often shame-based or regret-based. It asks questions that do not have useful answers, and it keeps circling the same emotional drain. Why did I do that? Why did that happen to me? Why was I not different? Why did they not understand? Why can't I let this go? Rumination loops. Healthy reminiscing integrates. It helps us gather meaning. It allows us to revisit the past with curiosity instead of self-punishment. It lets us notice what was beautiful, what was hard, what was learned, and what we may want to bring forward. I like to think of it this way. The past can become a courtroom or it can become a library. Rumination often feels like it's putting you on trial, and reminiscing lets you go find a very helpful book and retrieve something useful. I really want you to hear that distinction, because when we are working on behavior change, the way we relate to our past matters a lot. If I use my past only as evidence against myself, then I'm going to create discouragement. I'm going to create shame. I'm going to create the feeling of why even try. But if I use the past as a library, then I can go back and retrieve evidence of strength, of creativity, of resilience, of courage and growth. That changes the emotional experience of memory. And remember, this is one of the core ideas we come back to again and again. Circumstances do not create our feelings. Our thoughts about the circumstances create our feelings. A memory can be the circumstance. The thought you have about the memory is what creates the emotional experience. And a quote that I often return to in this work, and I remind myself of all the time: the past only exists today in what I think about it. The past only exists today in what I think about it. The thought you have about memory is what creates the emotional experience. Two people can remember the same season of life very differently. One person may look back and think, that was when everything was falling apart. And another may look back and think, that's when I learned how strong I was. Same chapter, different meaning, different feeling. And this does not mean that we force ourselves to rewrite painful things as positive. That's not what I'm saying. But it does mean we can approach our memories with more agency. We can ask whether a memory is helping us understand ourselves with compassion or whether we're using it to attack ourselves. We can notice when we are retrieving wisdom or rehearsing shame. This is why reminiscing can be so valuable for behavior change. Change is not just about becoming someone new. Sometimes change is about recovering access to parts of yourself that may have been buried under stress, under busyness, under fear, and just under the routine of daily life. You may remember a version of yourself who was more curious, who was more playful, who was more creative, maybe more willing to try something new. And remembering those things, those memories, matter. Not because you need to go backward, but because they can help you move forward with a more complete picture of who you are. The brain loves evidence. And often when we are trying to change, we look for evidence in the present moment only. Do I feel motivated today? Do I feel confident today? Do I feel ready today? And if the answer is no, we assume we can't move. But your present emotional state is not the full evidence file. Your life contains evidence. Your memories contain evidence. You may not feel brave today, but there are moments in your life when bravery was present. And you may not feel confident today, but that does not mean that confidence has never been a part of your life. Reminiscing helps you access all of these things. It says, let's widen the lens. And I think this is especially powerful because our brains are naturally prone to narrowing, especially under stress. When we feel overwhelmed, discouraged, or uncertain, our attention can shrink around the current problem. We start to believe this moment is the whole story. But memory can restore that perspective. It can remind us that we have lived through many moments, many versions, many seasons. And now, that doesn't mean that it's going to magically solve the current challenge, right? But it can change the way we meet it. So, how do we use reminiscing intentionally? Not as an escape, not as an avoidance, not as a way to say everything was way better back then, but as a way to retrieve identity, meaning, and possibility. Here's a simple practice that I want to offer you. Choose one memory, not necessarily the biggest memory and not necessarily the most impressive one, just a memory that carries some warmth or meaning. It could be a family reunion story, a childhood summer, a first apartment, a road trip, holiday, a moment you did something hard. And then ask yourself, what version of me was present in that memory? What did I care about then? What strength did I have? What feeling do I associate with that memory? What part of that feeling is still available to me now? And what is one small way I could bring that version of myself into today? That last question is really important because the goal of reminiscing is not to live in the past. The goal is to let the past inform the present. A memory might remind you that you used to love music. So today, play a song that you have not heard in years. It might remind you that you used to love being outside. So today, go take a walk. It might remind you that you used to be silly. So let yourself laugh instead of being so serious. That is reminiscing as identity retrieval. That is looking back in order to bring something forward. And if you're with other people, like your family, this can be even more powerful. One of the beautiful things about reminiscing in families or old friendships is that other people often remember parts of us that we may have forgotten. They may say, "You were always the one who made everyone laugh. You were always the one who noticed when someone was left out." Because life has a way of covering us up. Responsibilities cover us up, stress covers us up, roles cover us up. And then someone who knew us in another season hands us back a piece of ourselves. And that's a gift. Now, not every remembered identity is one we want to keep carrying. Sometimes family systems freeze people in old roles, right? The responsible one, the dramatic one, the difficult one. And part of healthy behavior change is being able to say, yes, that may be part of my story, but it's not the whole of who I am either. Memory can inform identity, but it does not have to imprison identity. You are allowed to remember who you were without being limited by who you were. You are allowed to honor the past without obeying every old rule. And that, to me, is one of the most empowering ways to think about reminiscing. We are not going back to become our past selves. We are going back to understand ourselves more fully. And when we understand ourselves more fully, change becomes less about self-rejection and more about self-continuity. It is not, I have become a completely different person. It is, I am bringing forward the strong, wisest, most honest parts of who I have always been. And that feels very different in the nervous system. It feels less like force and more like alignment. That's why I think reminiscing deserves a place in our behavior change toolkit. The brain needs more than goals. It needs meaning, it needs stories, it needs evidence, and it needs emotional connection. And sometimes one memory can give us all of that. So this week, here is your Think Thursday invitation. Take 10 minutes and intentionally reminisce. Look through a few photos, listen to an old song, ask a family member to tell you a story. Hold an object that has meaning. Think about a place that you used to love. And as you do this, do not just ask what happened. Ask, ask yourself, who was I there? What mattered to me? What does this memory remind me that is still a part of me? Because looking back is not always about wanting to go backwards. Sometimes looking back is how we gather the pieces of ourselves we forgot and that we would like to bring forward. Your past self is not gone. Your past self is part of the architecture of who you are now. Maybe there is something there that you need today. A little courage, a little playfulness, a little perspective, or a little proof that you have changed before and you can change again. Thanks so much for spending Think Thursday with me. If you like this topic, go back and listen to the other Think Thursday episode on reminiscing. And until next time, choose peace, my friends. I will see you on Monday.